Six jolly miners, we're not worth a pin, but when we get a bit of coal, we'll make the kettle sing. So we'll riddle and we'll fiddle and we'll make the earth go round. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. One came from Cornwall and two from Derby town. The others came from Oaty Bridge and they all came firing down. So we'll riddle and we'll fiddle and we'll make the earth go round. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. Sometimes we've money and sometimes none at all, but we can get good credit, boys, when on it we do call. So we'll riddle and we'll fiddle and we'll make the earth go round. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. So now we call for liquor to drink a health all round. Success to jolly miners that work all underground. So we'll riddle and we'll fiddle and we'll make the earth go round. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. If you don't mind your troubles, we will have a motty down. Come on, you jolly miners, and put your jackets on. We work for Newton Chambers, and he's a gentleman. Oh, Chambers in his chariot, Newton's in his gig. Hairs on a donkey's back and bristles on a pig. Hairs on a donkey's back and bristles on a pig.
In ancient times, the Great Salt Lake covered almost the entire state of Utah. Utah is part of the Great Basin. Rivers flow into it, not out. Shorelines of the ancient giant lake, called Lake Bonneville, can still be seen in Salt Lake Valley. Lake Bonneville's old bottomlands became a desert wilderness. Small groups of Ute and Paiute Indians struggled to survive here. Utah was a wilderness no large body of people wanted. In 1776, the year America declared her independence. In 1776, the year when Thomas Miner's descendant, Asa Miner, married bride Lois in Sharon, Connecticut. In that same year, 1776, Fathers Escalante and Dominguez entered Utah from New Mexico, heading for California. The priests were the first known white men to enter Utah. Utah was Spanish and then Mexican territory. British and American fur trappers, mountain men named Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith, Eteen Provo, and Peter Skeen Ogden, crisscrossed Utah mountains and rivers seeking beaver pelts in the 1820s and 1830s. In the 1840s, U.S. government explorer John C. Fremont explored and mapped the Great Salt Lake region. But Utah remained a land in need of people. Thomas Miner, through son Clement, then William, then Elihu, had a descendant named Asa Miner, the one who married Lois in that famous year of 1776. Asa and Lois Miner's son, Azel, was born in 1777 in Sharon, Connecticut. Azel Miner left New England and moved to New York. He married Sylvia Munson and then lived in central New York, where 5 children were born to them, including Albert Miner, born in 1809. About 1816, the Azel Miner family moved west from New York into Ohio, to New London, about 35 miles southwest of Cleveland. Azel Miner died in New London. Azel's son, Albert Miner, came of age in Ohio. He was a 6th-generation son of Thomas Miner through Clement, William, Elihu, Asa, and Azel Miner. Albert, when age 22, married Tamma Durfee, age 18, in New London, Ohio, in August 1831. That winter, both newlyweds converted to Mormonism, a new religion not 2 years old. Mormonism began when Joseph Smith, a youngster in upstate New York, was confused about which church to join. He prayed for guidance. In answer, he said the Father and the Son appeared to him, called him to be a modern prophet, empowered to restore the ancient Church of Christ. An angel named Moroni appeared to him and showed him where ancient gold plates were buried, which Joseph Smith by revelation translated into the Book of Mormon, a religious record of ancient American peoples whom Christ once visited. Mormon missionaries preached in Ohio, where the Miners lived. They converted and baptized Albert and Tamma. Albert was the only miner in his parents' family who became Mormons. Albert and Tamma gave some of their children Mormon names: Moroni, Mormon, and Alma. Their other children were Polly, Orson, Sylvia, Matilda, Don Carlos, and Melissa. Albert and Tamma, with Tamma's family, the Durfees, moved into the new Mormon community, Kirtland, Ohio. Albert farmed, but on Saturdays he hauled stones to build a Mormon temple, which still stands there. Mormon prophet Joseph Smith gave Albert and about 100 other men special blessings for their labors on the temple. The Mormons were persecuted and forced to leave Kirtland. Albert Miner was too ill to go west with the Mormons. In January 1838, he recovered enough, Tamma said,
so he could ride in a sleigh on a bed, and I held the umbrella over him. With our 2 children on my lap, we went 80 miles from Kirtland to Huron County, where Albert's folks lived.
The next spring, they sold their Kirtland farm. By mid-June 1838, they moved by wagon to Mormon settlements in Missouri. The miners settled by Log Creek, 6 miles south of the main Mormon settlement at Far West. River sickness struck. Tamma could not walk. Albert could not even harness his team or care for them. Eventually, the family recovered, except for 3-year-old Sylvia, who died. But Missourians drove the Mormons out, killing nearly 2 dozen at the Haun's Mill Massacre. During the winter of 1837-38, Albert Miner helped Mormon refugees flee eastward to the Mississippi River and across into Illinois. In Illinois, the Mormons built a new city on the Mississippi River. They called it Nauvoo. Albert was ordained a Mormon elder there in 1839. The Albert Miner family, with other Mormons, built a log home and farmed 30 miles south of Nauvoo at Morley's settlement. According to Tamma, they got along the best way they could. In 1842, Albert moved his family to Nauvoo, 4 miles east of the temple, to be closer to the prophet and the temple being built there. Albert sometimes helped guard Joseph Smith. Mobs upset by Mormon political power, prosperity, and unusual beliefs killed Joseph Smith in June 1844. Brigham Young, as senior apostle, succeeded Smith as the church's prophet and leader. A year later, mobs attacked Morley's settlement, killing Albert's father-in-law, Edmund Durfee. Tamma described the attack.
When it got dark, the mob built a fire close by the barns and stables, and the Mormons thought they meant to burn their horses, so they ran out to stop the fire. The mob stood back in the timber, and as our men went between them and the fire, they shot off a dozen guns. But my father was the only one they killed.
Albert and 100 others rode night and day to help outlying Mormons move into Nauvoo for safety. He and his family moved into the city, too. Nauvoo then numbered about 12,000 Mormons, with several thousand others living nearby. Early in 1846, the Mormons deserted their new city and temple. Leaders decided to move them to the Rocky Mountain wilderness. Albert stayed behind as a guard to help defend a few hundred Mormons who lacked wagons. Mobs attacked, and the Miner family was forced to flee across the river into Iowa territory. Son Mormon said Albert took 10 trips across the river to move his family's goods and those of Tamma's brother. Moroni, age 11, and Mormon 9, ferried the family's cows across. The miners now were refugees without a home. They camped on the west side of the Mississippi River for 2 weeks, 14 to a wagon. There, lacking food, they saw flocks of quail land by their tents and wagons. Matilda, then 10, said the quail looked like beautiful clouds sent from heaven. The birds were tame and easily caught with bare hands, and provided welcome food for the hungry refugees, and many called this a godsend and miracle. Albert and Tamma's baby girl, Melissa, died there, near present Montrose, Iowa, and was buried on the bank of the Des Moines River under a big tree. Mormon refugees moved across Iowa. Albert and Tamma stayed in Iowaville, about 50 miles west of the Mississippi River. The site is now farmland between towns called Eldon and Selma. Albert earned money for the family by hauling and by running a ferry boat across the Des Moines River. According to Tamma,
when my baby died, I took sick for 9 months, and I never sat up only to have my bed made. My husband put up some hay for his stock and said he'd go back to Ohio to see his folks.
Albert, almost penniless, walked most of the way and preached to his miner relatives, but they would not convert. Tamma recalled,
Polly was now 14 and took care of our family of 8 and waited on me while I was sick and Father was gone.
He returned 10 weeks later, in mid-May 1847, exhausted and ill. Albert Miner worked half-days, expecting to soon recover. Instead, he died in Iowaville in January 1848, leaving Tamma a widow with 7 children.
I and the children thought a better man never lived. A kind, good-natured, free-hearted, industrious man. He won friends and was a genius at doing anything he saw anyone else do.
Daughter Matilda later in life recalled that she was 10 when her father died, and that to try to forget her sorrow and fear, she would look up into the sky and count the stars to make herself sleep. When Tamma's health allowed, she moved her family west to be with the main body of saints. The Mormon settlement at Council Bluffs became the miners' new home for 2 years. They lived near Mosquito Creek. In 1850, Tamma, aided by Mormon and Moroni, hitched up a yoke of oxen and a yoke of cows and joined Mormon wagon trains heading for Utah, 1,000 miles away.
I and my 5 boys and 2 girls started out with 100 wagons, June 10th, 1850.
Thousands of Gold Rush wagons were on the trails that year, too. The miners traveled in the William Snow Wagon Company and the Joseph Young wagon train. Son Mormon later recalled the buffalo herds they encountered. I was greatly impressed with the vast herds of buffalo. So numerous were they that oftentimes they had to be driven away from the road to keep from interfering with the wagon train. Needless to say, we had plenty of buffalo meat. The Miner family spent 11 weeks on the Mormon Trail, moving 15 miles a day across the prairies, hugging the north shore of the shallow Platte River. Oldest son Orson drove the wagon for the family. Tamma had poor health and had to ride in the wagon part of the time. Tamma tried to keep a few slices of bread toasted until dry and hard like a rock so it wouldn't mold and so it could be eaten on days when bad weather meant they could not cook. Matilda said the bread was more precious and tasty than candy. They moved into the high plains country, passing Chimney Rock, and moving into what is now Wyoming. Daughter Matilda walked barefoot and sometimes had to carry wood from miles away for their evening camps. A girlfriend took off her own shoes and gave them to Matilda, whose feet were worn and bleeding. They passed near old Fort Laramie and northwest to present Casper. They skirted Independence Rock and passed by Devil's Gate, Split Rock, and South Pass. Mormon Miner said he walked barefoot most of the way, driving cattle and sleeping on the ground at night. Moroni Miner, in old age, told his granddaughter, Ina Miner, about his bad experience with Indians while on the trail. As she tells it,
one of the things I do remember was how the Indians come into camp, and he had been walking on barefooted all this time, and they offered a pair of moccasins to his mother for him for some flour. And his mother felt so bad to think that he was going barefooted, you know. So she got together all the flour she thought she could use and gave it to the Indian, and the Indians gave him one moccasin. And he said after that how he hated the Indians because they'd only given him one moccasin.
Climbing above 5,000 feet, the miners' wagon train entered the mountain country, crossing the Green River, the Black Fork River, and passing the old fort belonging to mountain man Jim Bridger. As they passed the rocks called the Needles, they entered what is now Utah. In Echo Canyon, the pioneers fired off rifles, blew bugles, and listened to echoes bouncing off the steep walls. In September, Tamma and her children entered Great Salt Lake Valley, coming through Emigration Canyon, just as Brigham Young and the 1847 pioneers had done 3 years earlier. The Mormon pioneers, including Tamma and her children, gave thanks to God for a new land to settle. Their gratitude echoes the experience Thomas Miner's son, John, had back in the 1670s. The Miner family history tells us that John and several friends, due to religious differences, left Stratford, Connecticut to start their own settlement. After wandering in rugged country, the group finally found the beautiful Pomperaug Valley, where Woodbury, Connecticut now stands. The sight so delighted them that John is said to have knelt down and led his followers in prayer, seeking God's blessing on their settlement. Tamma Miner and her children were likewise grateful to see the Great Salt Lake Valley. Tamma said they arrived without any home or anyone to look for one. They were very lonesome indeed. She married Enos Curtis late in 1850. Their first Utah home was beside the Jordan River, which, like the Jordan in Israel, drains a freshwater lake into a Dead Sea. Tamma's oldest son, Orson Miner, a kind, good-natured boy, died that winter at age 17. Tamma and her new husband moved to a new Mormon outpost called Springville in April 1851, near where Fathers Escalante and Dominguez had explored 75 years before. The family of pioneers at once began plowing and planting. They raised grain and livestock. Moroni and Mormon helped dig the town's first water ditch. They finished on a Saturday night, so church elders said the ditch could not be opened until Monday, in order to keep the Sabbath holy. But Moroni confessed the big boys couldn't resist opening the dam on Sunday to see if it would run. It did. Tamma and her family lived in wagons until the house was built, from logs brought from the canyon and covered with cut poles, straw, and dirt. Tamma's second husband, Enos Curtis, died in 1856. Utah in 1850 became a territory of the United States. For the next 30 years, Brigham Young directed Mormon followers to settle in more than 300 colonies in what is now Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, and Arizona. In 1857, a U.S. Army marched against the Mormons to put down a rebellion that did not exist. Mormon Miner joined the Mormon Home Guard that created battlements atop Echo Canyon walls to stop the Army. Peace was negotiated without bloodshed, but the Army established Camp Floyd in the West Desert and stayed in Utah until 1861. During the Civil War, Colonel Patrick Connor with his unit of California volunteers arrived in Utah to protect it. He built Fort Douglas and aimed its guns on Brigham Young's residence, the Lion House and the Beehive House. Colonel Connor encouraged his soldiers in off-duty to search Utah's canyons for gold and silver. He is considered the father of Utah mining. In time, Utah mines produced several millionaires, including Thomas Kearns, whose mansion still stands in Salt Lake City. Utah mines produce great treasures of gold and silver, lead and coal, and copper. Tamma and her children visited Salt Lake City each spring and fall to attend church conferences in the old tabernacle or under the Bowery. After 1867, they attended conferences in the new, now famous, Tabernacle. Utah became the crossroads of the West for California wagon trains, stagecoaches, the Pony Express, and the railroads. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad line was completed when track from the east met track from the west at Promontory Pass, Utah. Brigham Young had contracted to help lay track in Utah, giving work to many of his people. Moroni, Mormon, and Don Carlos Miner, Tamma's sons, helped build the track road bed near Promontory Pass. Indians disliked Mormons settling in Utah's better valleys, so whites and Indians fought the Walker War and the Black Hawk War. Moroni and Mormons served militia duty in the Black Hawk War. Other people named Miner settled in Utah. One was Aurelius Miner, who was born in Woodbury, Connecticut in 1832. Aurelius was a descendant of Thomas Miner through Thomas's oldest son, John. Aurelius practiced law in Ohio and Iowa, and then at age 22 headed for California. He visited his uncle in Utah and converted to Mormonism. He became a lawyer and politician in Salt Lake City. He married Laura Marinda Hyde, a school teacher. When the U.S. Army entered Utah in 1857, Aurelius was one who helped to prepare Mormon settlements to be torched if fighting broke out. Aurelius was a judge, prosecuting attorney, district attorney, and a territorial deputy attorney general. He made a striking picture with his high silk hat, polished boots, gold-headed cane, white hair, big blue eyes, and white beard. On one of his 2 proselyting missions, he visited his minor relatives in Ohio. They hardly recognized Aurelius, but kindly received him and let him explain Mormonism to them. He was a church attorney for Brigham Young and 2 other presidents of the church. He drew up the incorporation papers for ZCMI, the first department store west of the Mississippi River. He loved to sing, play chess, and was a gifted artist. He always carried candy in his pockets for the children to find. By first wife, Laura Marinda, he had 9 children, and by second wife, Annie, 5 children. He was jailed and disbarred for being a Mormon polygamist, but was later reinstated as a lawyer. The Aurelius Minor family prospered and became a leading family in Salt Lake City. Aurelius died in 1913 after a life of service to church and community. In 1890, President Benjamin Harrison appointed James Minor, born in Michigan in 1842, as a justice of the Utah Territory Supreme Court. After his 4-year term, he stayed in Utah, and in 1895 was elected a judge of the Utah Supreme Court. Like Albert Minor, James Minor descended from Thomas Minor of Stonington through Thomas's son, Clement, and grandson, William. James was the 10th child of Alvin and Betsy Latham Minor. He married Harriet E. Baker in 1870. James had a law office upstairs in the Emporium Building in Marshall, Michigan from 1869 to 1873. After James came to Utah, his daughter Mabel married his clerk, Charles McClure, in 1890. Daughter Harriet married in Ogden, Utah in 1892, but died just 7 years later and was buried in the family plot in Marshall, Michigan. James retired in 1903 after serving for 2 years as Chief Justice of Utah's Supreme Court. He practiced law and died in 1907 in Utah and was buried in Michigan. He was remembered for refreshing kindliness, sweetness of temper, and a love of justice. In 1893, while Aurelius and James were busy with legal work, the Salt Lake Temple was finished and dedicated. It took 40 years to build using granite blocks from nearby canyons. In 1893, Utah became a state. Meanwhile in Springville, after the 1850s, Tamma Minor Curtis lived out her days, first in the log cabin and then in an adobe home. When visiting friends, she took along her basket of straw. Her fingers swiftly braided and sewed straw hats, which she sold to raise money for the town's old white meeting house. Tamma died in 1885. Besides 9 children by Albert, Tamma had 4 children by Enos Curtis and 1 by her 3rd husband. Her children became adults, married, and produced a large posterity. Oldest daughter Polly Minor married Dominicus Carter, and they settled in Provo, where Mr. Carter raised grain and did blacksmithing. "I lived and enjoyed myself first rate," Polly said. She was the mother of 7 children. Tamma's son, Moroni Minor, married Nancy Chase. With younger brother Don Carlos, he homesteaded 160 acres of South Springville. He and Nancy had 15 children. They lived in a house Moroni built, which still stands in Springville. Moroni lived to be 100 years old. He died in 1935. Tamma's son, Mormon Minor, settled in Fairview in central Utah. He married Phoebe Curtis. They had 13 children. Tamma's daughter Matilda, when she was 15, married John White Curtis as his 2nd wife. She was an immaculate housekeeper and was an expert with the needle. She and John had 10 children in Springville, and 4 more after moving south to Aurora, Utah, where they were one of 5 families who pioneered that farming community. Tamma's son Alma married Mary Housekeeper, who died a few months later. Then he married Caroline Nielsen in 1868, whom he met in Fairview while homesteading with his brother Mormon. Alma and Caroline farmed 160 acres near Fairview and built a brick house. They raised 12 children to maturity. They made their living mostly from their dairy business. Don Carlos, known as Carl, took care of Mother Tamma after his older brothers moved from home. He helped build Tamma an adobe house to replace the log one, which became a schoolhouse. He hauled freight to mining camps in Nevada and logged in nearby canyons. He built himself a wooden house, now in ruins. Carl married Anne Eliza Holden, who died after giving birth to twins in 1882. The twins died also. Later, Carl married Delilah Davis, shown here. They had 9 children. Carl died in 1902. His Springville house still stands. Since 1850, branches of the Miner family have contributed to the building of Utah. Today, they continue to contribute to the well-being of Utah society. Utah once was a land needing people. When the Mormons came, several descendants of Thomas Miner came with them. These decent, God-fearing Miner families helped populate and tame a desolate land. And as the Mormons say, they made the desert blossom as a rose.